When a human being operates from a subterranean sense of self-worth, the absolute baseline of human courtesy is continually misidentified as an extraordinary display of emotional charity. This psychological phenomenon manifests as a deep relational poverty, wherein the individual, convinced at a subconscious level that they are only entitled to emotional sustenance in its most diluted form, accepts bare minimum reliability with overwhelming gratitude. When someone returns a text after days of silence, remembers a minor detail mentioned in passing, or simply refrains from overt disrespect during a disagreement, the individual experiencing low self-worth constructs a monument to this basic behavior. This dynamic is structurally identical to a starving person entering a restaurant and weeping with gratitude when handed a single, lukewarm glass of tap water. Because they secretly believe they lack the standing to demand a full, nourishing meal, they elevate standard procedure into an act of profound generosity. In personal relationships, mistaking the floor for the ceiling creates an environment where neglect is endlessly rationalized and microscopic crumbs of effort are celebrated, blinding the individual to the reality that true respect is not a rare award to be won, but the non-negotiable entry fee for access to their life. Carl Jung famously observed that until the unconscious is made conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Our external relational reality consistently acts as a mirror to our internal psychological terrain. If you unconsciously hold a fragile, impoverished view of your own intrinsic value, you will magnetically select, tolerate, and rationalize environments that confirm that precise internal devaluation. Low effort feels inherently safe to a compromised ego, because it matches the familiar internal narrative of conditional worthiness. Demanding consistency, emotional presence, and mutual respect feels existential and dangerous when you harbor a secret doubt about whether your core self is actually worth the trouble. The moment an individual undergoes a genuine shift in internal value, standard courtesy ceases to be a prized victory and becomes the absolute baseline requirement for any ongoing connection. Punctuality, clear communication, accountability, and emotional safety are no longer treated as heroic gestures. They are recognized as the basic cost of admission. By ceasing the habit of building monuments for individuals who merely manage to show up, a person stops rewarding low investment with high emotional access, creating the necessary distance to evaluate whether a connection contains genuine depth or merely functional convenience. One of the most insidious traps of low self-worth is the persistent confusion of nervous system dysregulation with romantic chemistry. When an individual lacks a solid internal anchor, unpredictability, hot and cold dynamics, and mixed signals act as powerful psychological hooks. The constant anxiety of not knowing where one stands, dissecting brief, ambiguous text messages with friends as if decoding ancient hieroglyphics, or waiting for a fleeting moment of warmth after days of cold detachment, generates an addictive intermittent reinforcement loop. The brief drops of validation feel like an intense emotional high precisely because they are surrounded by vast stretches of anxiety and distance. This state of hypervigilance is routinely mislabeled as passionate romantic spark, when in reality it is nothing more than an activated fight-or-flight response triggered by the threat of abandonment. The individual becomes hopelessly addicted to the potential of who the person could be on their best day, entirely ignoring the sobering, painful reality of who they demonstrate themselves to be on an average day. This psychological projection allows one to fill in another's emotional silence with hopeful narratives, constructing an elaborate fantasy to avoid confronting the plain truth of low investment. As self-worth takes firm root within the psyche, mixed signals undergo a complete transformation in how they are perceived. They lose every drop of their romanticized charm and are recognized instantly as a massive, unnecessary inconvenience. The emotional roller coaster that once felt thrilling begins to feel utterly exhausting to a mind that has chosen self-respect over dramatic validation. The individual wakes up to the fundamental truth that genuine interest does not leave a person wandering in a maze of constant uncertainty, nor does it require a specialized translation guide to decipher. When someone truly values another, their words align seamlessly with their actions. Their presence is steady, and their communication is transparent. Recognizing this reality allows a self-anchored person to reframe a maybe or a vague, half-hearted commitment as functionally identical to a definitive no. Instead of leaning in closer to solve the puzzle of an emotionally distant partner or working harder to earn a permanent spot in the life of someone who treats them as an option, the self-respecting individual calmly steps back. They recognize that their peace of mind is vastly more valuable than the fleeting validation of an indecisive presence, freeing up mental bandwidth for connections rooted in ease, clarity, and reciprocal effort. A subtle and pervasive trap for those struggling with underlying feelings of inadequacy is the adoption of the fixer or savior persona within relationships. Operating from a compromised sense of self-worth often compels an individual to make themselves indispensable by solving every crisis, managing emotional messes, and adapting their personal boundaries to accommodate others' demands. Being the reliable problem solver provides a temporary, powerful illusion of safety and purpose. The individual secretly believes that if they can render themselves completely essential to another person's daily survival, that person will never abandon them. However, acting as a functional utility in someone else's life is fundamentally distinct from being cherished for one's core essence. People will readily consume endless streams of free labor, advice, convenience, and emotional accommodation without ever developing a genuine respect for the person providing it. Jung highlighted how individuals frequently hide behind specific protective personas to shield themselves from the terrifying vulnerability of being truly seen. In this case, the individual pours all their energy into being useful, so they never have to test the frightening hypothesis of whether they would be wanted purely for who they are if they stopped fixing everything. Escaping the utility trap requires confronting a series of uncomfortable, penetrating questions regarding the true foundation of one's relationships. An individual must ask, if I stopped solving their problems, managing their logistics, and offering unconditional emotional labor today, what would actually remain of this bond? Does this person desire my presence, my laughter, and my authentic self? Or are they simply attached to the free labor and boundaryless convenience I provide? Realizing intrinsic worth means officially resigning from the role of the perpetual fixer and recognizing that a healthy human connection must be built on mutual appreciation rather than functional codependency. Holding a relationship together through sheer, unassisted personal effort is an exhausting exercise that ultimately erodes self-trust. When self-worth deepens, an individual refuses to function as an emergency contact who is only remembered during times of personal crisis. They actively pivot away from connections that view them as a resource to be tapped, directing their energy toward relationships where support, curiosity, and consideration flow freely in both directions, allowing them to experience the profound relief of being loved for their existence rather than their performance. In the pursuit of rapid connection, individuals with low self-worth frequently engage in oversharing, laying bare their deepest insecurities, past traumas, and rawest emotional wounds within hours or days of meeting a stranger. While this behavior is routinely rationalized as brave vulnerability or authentic transparency, it is more accurately understood as a form of frantic emotional bargaining. It springs from a subconscious belief that one's present, day-to-day self is insufficient to hold another person's interest or respect. The individual feels an anxious compulsion to offer up their historical pain as an emotional down payment, hoping that by handing over the keys to their private history, the other person will feel obligated to stay, validate their suffering, or reciprocate with their own secrets. This creates a highly fragile foundation built on premature emotional exposure rather than earned, slow-cooked trust. Jung emphasized that rushing to project internal vulnerabilities outward without self-containment dilutes personal power. By exposing tender, unhealed parts to individuals who have not yet demonstrated the emotional maturity or stability to handle them with care, one essentially asks a stranger to carry weight they haven't earned the right to touch, leaving the speaker intensely vulnerable to betrayal, cold indifference, or exploitation. As self-worth solidifies, an individual's relationship with their personal narrative undergoes a radical transformation. Personal history, past wounds, and tender vulnerabilities cease to be emotional currency spent to purchase fast affection. The individual comes to understand that privacy is not a defense mechanism rooted in secrecy, but a dignified expression of self-respect. True emotional intimacy cannot be shortcut through intense, boundaryless sessions of emotional dumping. It must be constructed brick by brick through consistent, proven reliability over extended time. Recognizing intrinsic value means viewing one's inner world as a private sanctuary, a sacred space that requires time, care, and demonstrated integrity for another to enter. Instead of leading with past wounds to prove depth or secure safety, the self-anchored person allows others to experience their grounded presence in the moment first. They allow prospective partners or friends to navigate daily interactions, humor, perspectives, and basic boundaries before granting access to deeper historical layers, quietly observing how small truths are handled before entrusting someone with larger ones. If an individual displays subtle judgment, insensitivity, or gossip early on, the self-respecting person notes it calmly and keeps the sanctuary doors closed, preserving their history for those rare, proven stewards of emotional depth. The single greatest driver keeping individuals tethered to toxic, unfulfilling, or draining dynamics is an unexamined, existential terror of being alone. Underneath the rationalizations for staying in cold or chaotic relationships lies a persistent whisper, questioning whether this is as good as it gets, or warning that leaving will result in perpetual isolation. To a mind lacking internal value, solitude is not a peaceful sanctuary, but a punitive sentence. Being alone in an empty room forces an individual to confront their own unbuffered internal dialogue, self-doubt, and restlessness, without the distracting anesthetic of external validation. Consequently, any presence, even one that actively disrespects, ignores, or drains them, is treated as a preferable shield against the void of their own company. People stay in unreciprocated friendships to avoid an open weekend schedule, or tolerate neglectful partners because eating dinner alone feels like a public confession of failure. Jung recognized that facing oneself in total quiet is one of the most intimidating yet essential psychological challenges a human can undertake. Habitually, fleeing solitude is functionally fleeing oneself. handing immense control to anyone willing to offer even a minor distraction from the internal landscape one is afraid to inhabit. When internal self-worth takes firm root, the paralyzing dread of isolation dissolves, completely reshaping an individual's relationship with quiet space. Solitude ceases to be viewed as an embarrassing sign of being unloved or discarded. It is reclaimed as a neutral, deeply restorative sanctuary where one can reconnect with their true self without external noise or performance pressure. Self-worth acts as an unshakable safety net, turning quiet, unscheduled hours from an empty void into an open canvas for personal restoration, creativity, and self-reflection. Once an individual genuinely enjoys their own company, their baseline standard for who they permit into their life rises exponentially. They no longer view a prospective partner or friend as a life raft required to save them from the terror of an empty room, but as a potential addition to an already solid, peaceful life. The fundamental relational question shifts from, will this person keep me from being alone, to, is this person's presence more peaceful, uplifting, and valuable than my own quiet solitude? If the answer is no, stepping away becomes an effortless act of self-preservation. The individual recognizes that the most profound, damaging form of isolation is not physical solitude, but sitting directly next to someone who makes them feel completely invisible, misunderstood, and emotionally drained. A pervasive symptom of compromised self-worth is the constant tendency to shrink, minimize, or negotiate away one's fundamental emotional requirements to avoid inconveniently disturbing others. An individual may deeply desire a committed, transparent relationship, yet the instant a prospective partner expresses hesitation, they quickly laugh it off and claim they were only looking for something casual too. When hurt by dismissiveness or broken trust, they swallow their pain to avoid being labeled as needy, difficult, or overly dramatic. Operating from low self-worth makes basic needs, such as accountability, emotional safety, clear communication, and consistent effort, feel like heavy, unreasonable burdens forced upon others. The individual acts as an aggressive negotiator against their own well-being, convincing themselves that if they can just expect less, demand nothing, and make themselves completely convenient, the other person will finally reward them with lasting affection. Jung observed that suppressing authentic emotional realities to maintain a comfortable persona creates a profound, exhausting internal fracture. Habitually abandoning one's truth inevitably builds a reservoir of deep resentment toward others for failing to meet unstated standards, while systematically destroying self-trust. Stepping into true self-worth requires officially retiring from the negotiation table regarding one's core emotional requirements. An individual comes to understand that their essential needs are neither open for debate, compromise, or apology, nor are they personality flaws or unreasonable demands. They are simply the foundational blueprint required for them to exist healthily within a connection. Settling into firm self-value allows a person to state what they require with calm dignity, absolute clarity, and zero underlying hostility or defensiveness. They no longer write lengthy, essay-length text messages attempting to convince another person to treat them with respect, nor do they engage in circular debates to prove the validity of their feelings. Needs are stated as quiet, simple facts. If the person across from them lacks the capacity, willingness, or maturity to meet that reasonable baseline, the self-respecting individual refrains from trying to fix, teach, or persuade them. They abandon the exhausting project of trying to transform an incompatible person into a compatible one, realizing that true alignment cannot be negotiated into existence through self-sacrifice. Recognizing that an inability to meet basic standards simply signifies a fundamental mismatch, they step back with their dignity intact, preserving their energy for connections where standards are met naturally. As an individual undertakes the quiet work of internal healing, a dramatic, almost startling shift occurs in their attraction radar. Traits that once appeared magnetic, thrilling, and irresistible suddenly present themselves as blatant red flags. When operating from unexamined low self-worth, a person is naturally drawn toward emotional chaos disguised as passion. The mysterious, unpredictable partner whose attention must be constantly won occupies their entire emotional horizon, because a mind conditioned by chaotic past patterns mistakes dynamic stability for a total lack of romantic spark. Straightforward, reliable, and emotionally available individuals are routinely written off as boring, simply because they do not trigger the familiar adrenaline spike of insecurity that was historically mistaken for love. Jung noted that we continuously project our unexamined internal states onto those we draw near. An unhealed belief that one must suffer to earn affection magnetically draws a person to emotionally unavailable partners who force them to repeat that exact struggle. However, as self-worth solidifies, the internal receiver recalibrates entirely. Unavailability and inconsistency lose their dramatic pull and are clearly recognized as emotional unreadiness, while predictability, transparency, kindness, and groundedness become intensely attractive qualities that offer the ultimate luxury, complete emotional safety. One of the most profound realities of standing firmly in one's worth is that it rarely requires explosive confrontations or dramatic, angry cutoffs to clean up one's social circle. The dynamic takes care of itself through an organic process of filtration. When an individual operates from low self-worth, they effectively act as an all-access pass for those around them, saying yes when exhausted, apologizing for having reasonable boundaries, and single-handedly carrying the physical and emotional labor required to maintain distant connections. This creates a comfortable equilibrium for takers who adapt to receiving maximum investment for minimum effort. When the self-respecting individual undergoes an internal shift and changes their behavior, ceasing to overfunction, ending the habit of initiating every interaction, and offering calm, direct boundaries without launching into defensive monologues, they instantly disrupt the invisible rules of the system. Those who profited from the individual's lack of limits often react with irritation, accusing them of becoming distant, cold, or difficult. In truth, the individual hasn't become difficult. They have simply stopped being easy to exploit. As the unearned supply of effort dries up, individuals attached merely to convenience quietly drift away to find easier sources elsewhere, leaving behind a clean, spacious environment where balanced connections can take root. There is an undeniable, quiet magnetism radiated by an individual who is deeply rooted in their intrinsic value. When a person settles into their worth, they cease playing subtle emotional mind games, stop fishing for external applause to feel complete, and no longer demand that another person enter their life to save or fix them. Their presence is characterized not by anxious performative energy, but by a calm, self-contained stability. Operating from low self-worth projects and underlying subtle desperation, a needy frequency that magnetically attracts power seekers, manipulators, or emotionally immature partners looking for a people-pleaser to orbit them. Conversely, when an individual does the courageously quiet work of integrating their self-value, their outward projection changes entirely. They stop broadcasting a signal of exploitability, replacing it with a grounded authenticity that acts as a natural shield against toxic dynamics, while serving as a beacon for secure, mature individuals. A grounded person recognizes another grounded person almost instantly. By taking full responsibility for their own emotional well-being, the self-anchored individual shows up with directness and transparency, entering social spaces not with the anxious question, "Will they like me?" but with the self-respecting inquiry, "Do I like who I am and how I feel when I am around them?" Stepping into true self-worth completely redefines how an individual measures the success and health of a relationship. In the past, under the influence of compromised self-value, success was likely measured by emotional velocity, mistaking high-stakes drama, obsessive thoughts, intense emotional volatility, and middle-of-the-night resolution talks for deep, profound passion. The individual wore their endurance like a badge of honor, bragging about how much disrespect and chaos they could survive in the name of love, treating relational struggles as a grueling test to pass to earn ultimate devotion. Jung observed that as a person matures psychologically, their primary metric shifts away from chasing external validation and moves toward achieving inner harmony. When self-worth takes firm root, the loud, high-drama metrics of success melt away entirely. The individual realizes that a relationship requiring them to sacrifice their sleep, forfeit their mental health, or exist in a permanent state of hypervigilance is not a romantic triumph, but a tragic waste of human capacity. Success is redefined as a profoundly quiet reality. A calm Tuesday evening where one feels completely safe, heard, and unburdened in their own home. Enjoying open communication where disagreements are met with mutual respect rather than a desire to inflict pain. Ultimately, the quality of our external relationships is never transformed by attempting to manipulate, control, or script the actions of the people around us. It is not achieved by memorizing clever behavioral tricks to persuade an indecisive partner to choose us, nor by shrinking our authentic personality to fit into spaces that offer only crumbs. It has always been an entirely internal journey. As Jungian theory continuously reminds us, the external world, and most acutely, our choice in romantic partners and close friends, acts as a massive mirror reflecting back the exact portions of our internal landscape that we have not yet claimed or healed. When we hold an unconscious belief that we are fundamentally lacking, we will inevitably invite and tolerate individuals who treat us as an afterthought, enduring silence, broken promises, and emotional roller coasters because those conditions match our internal self-devaluation. But the precise moment those unconscious patterns are brought into the light of conscious awareness, the spell breaks. The individual realizes they were never broken or unlovable. They were simply operating from an outdated behavioral script that taught them to trade their self-respect for basic company. Reclaiming one's worth is not a dramatic, one-time epiphany where a person wakes up permanently, transformed overnight. It is an ongoing, quiet, daily commitment to self-sovereignty. It takes place in small, seemingly insignificant micro-moments, choosing not to send a second text to someone who ignored the first, politely declining an invitation to an event where one will be treated as an option rather than a presence, or stating a clear boundary calmly without launching into an anxious, defensive explanation, and holding that ground even if others react with irritation. Every single time an individual chooses internal peace over familiar relational anxiety, they actively rewrite their psychological narrative. They demonstrate to their own mind that they possess the courage and capacity to protect themselves, that their company is inherently valuable, and that their inner sanctuary will not be surrendered for cheap, fleeting validation. While stepping onto this path may initially feel terrifying as boundary-testing individuals walk away and the room temporarily grows quiet, that silence is not a void to be feared. It is the clean, fertile soil required for grounded, reciprocal, and deeply respectful connections to finally take root.